Industries that are hot, sectors set to outperform the market. That's what's here in Zacks Industry Rank Analysis. Charles Rotblatt, our senior market analyst, puts this report all together for us each week. He joins me once again to fill us in on an industry that he has zeroed in on once again. And I say once again because he's written about this in the recent past, I think. We'll ask him. Semiconductors are on your radar screen for this week. You have written about them recently, right?
Yeah, and I talked about them, last week when we did our first quarter preview, but I also talked about them more in depth about 6 weeks ago in early February. And one of the things I pointed out then is that we had seen 400 earnings estimates cut on a sector. So we saw analysts really severely cutting their earnings estimates.
I remember you were down pretty much on that then.
And I've been down on the semiconductor industry for quite a while, and I've been telling people try to avoid it. But it's very surprising when I looked at the numbers this week, we are starting to see some signs of stabilization. And I want to point out to people, I'm not saying that all of a sudden everything's great and you should throw all your money into semiconductor companies. And this may really be too early, but it does seem like we're seeing signs of stabilization as really suggesting that things in the industry aren't deteriorating as quickly anymore. And obviously, if you're an industry in contraction, one of the first signs of improvement is that things aren't contracting as quickly.
Right.
Doesn't mean we're actually seeing a rebound, doesn't mean conditions have changed and things are now good, but we're seeing signs that some of the analysts might think some of the analysts are looking at the industry and thinking we're not expecting things to really get far worse than they are now. Again, not necessarily better, but maybe at least in terms of earnings, we're starting to see a little bit of stabilization. Could be an early call, but that's what the data's showing right now.
So you're not really, while you're not as pessimistic, you're not really breaking out the champagne yet either.
No, and I think it's too early to do that, but it is notable that when we looked in February, we saw 400 earnings estimates being cut. Now that number has actually dropped to about 62. More importantly, when I talked about in early February, the number of negative estimates far outweigh the number of positive revisions. Now that's actually shifted, and we're now seeing more positive revisions than negative revisions. But I do want to couch that by saying you've got to kind of take this in perspective. I point out Marvel Technology in the piece. We've actually seen earnings estimates over the last 30 days being revised upwards. But when you consider the current estimate to where it was, say, 90 days ago, it's still down sharply. So a recent improvement, that's a positive for the stock. But when you look at the bigger picture, it's really not that rosy.
There's been a lot of cost cutting in this industry here of late. What's your gut feel for first quarter for this industry as far as earnings are concerned?
Terrible.
Really?
I mean, you know where it's going to be terrible. Every semiconductor company in S&P 500 is projected to have a year-over-year decline in earnings. So when we're looking at stabilization, it's not really going to help first quarter earnings. Maybe not even second quarter earnings. We're really looking maybe towards the second half or going on to next year. It's worth noting that sales are pretty close to a 4 or 5 year low, but when you look at all the devices that now use memory cards, not only all the wireless devices, but we talk about digital cameras, digital camcorders, MP3 players, music playing phones, printers. I mean, all the printers now have a little slot for a flash card in them. So we're seeing an ever-increasing use of semiconductors, and part of the decline in prices has been because there's absolutely no pricing power. You know as well as I know, if you go into a store, and certainly people watching realize this, you go into the store, the cost of chips are continuing to drop. At some point, those prices will stabilize, and if we get an uptick in demand from the economy, all that should be bullish for the semiconductors companies over the next several years. It's really a question of not if, but when. And obviously, I do want to point out when we're talking a little bit more optimistically about this industry, and I know I sound a little bit like a broken record, but this could be a little bit of an early call.
But while the chip industry might be just beginning to show some signs of stabilization, all those products that you mentioned that use chips, those sales haven't been, rising either. And so is what we're seeing here indicative from a sales and earnings standpoint of what the industries that represent that those products are in, cameras and all of those products, are we going to see some, some negativism there too here in the first quarter?
I think that's actually been factored into the forecast. The analysts following the chip companies are very aware of what's going on in the broader economy. So I think all that's reflected. And really the big problems for these semiconductor companies hasn't really been the demand from the consumer end. It's really been a question of inventory levels and a lack of pricing pressure. And they pretty much, these companies overbuilt too much supply, no pricing power. That's been a benefit to the consumers. But I think as you're starting to see inventory levels drop, and even the Semiconductor Industry Association saying inventories are now at historically low levels, hopefully we'll start to see that glut being taken out of. Not so great for the consumers because we won't continue to see those prices drop. But when you look at prices right now, honestly, if we see a 10 or 20% increase in chip prices, which would be extremely optimistic, it really wouldn't make a big difference to what you or I are paying for flash memory or to, say, upgrade our PC.
Darn, I thought maybe there was some hope there. Charles Ropflat, Senior Market Analyst at Zacks.com, has the text version of this week's industry rank analysis online at the moment. Go there to check it out. Just scroll down the homepage until you get to the headline under the banner, Industry Rank Analysis. With Charles, I'm Terry Ruffalo.